another edition of Beyond the Steps. And we are so excited today to have two guests with us, two wonderful guests with us today. Of course, I'm excited to have my friend Bree here with me, co-founder of Apolla Performance, and to be here with Linda Gernhardt and Steve Karaginis. I'm going to pronounce it right. I'm going to say Dr. K, really, is what I'm going to end up saying pretty much every time. But to be here with both of these experts today to talk about how we can best support our dancers who are living with chronic illness and disabilities. We are making our new schedules. Some of us are moving into new buildings. Some of us are upfilling old buildings. This is the time where we need to think about how accessible are our classes? How accessible is our curriculum? Are we really being inclusive, inviting, and affirming to everyone who wants to enjoy the art of dance? And in an effort to make sure that we know what the starting point is for that, and we have perspective from people who work with people with chronic illness and disabilities, as well as people who are living and dancing and thriving with chronic illness and disability, we have our two guests. So without further ado, please introduce our two guests.
Yes, Dr. Stephen Karaginis, we're going to call him Dr. K, is a primary care sports medicine physician and medical director of St. Joe's Sports Medicine at St. Mary Mercy Hospital and Integrated Healthcare. He's also a Michigander, just like yours truly. He achieved certification in performing arts medicine through the Performing Arts Medical Association. He serves on the board of directors for the Bridge Dance Project, our dear friends, we love them, as well as the executive board for Personal Safety and Dance International working group and advisory board for the Youth Protection Advocates in Dance. Our friends at YPAD do amazing work to keep kids happy, healthy, and safe in dance. He works with numerous studios and college dance programs in the Metro Detroit area. He's also a past president of the American Osteopathic Academy of Sports Medicine. Dr. K, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so grateful to have you.
Thank you for having me in my wonderful Mazda CX-5.
We've had some crazy weather in Michigan, and so Dr. K is the victim of some crazy power outages. So we appreciate him being here more than ever. And then we also have joining us today, Linda Gernhardt Whitlow is a first-generation femme, queer, and disabled dancer, yogi, entrepreneur, vegan cook, health enthusiast, and traveler. Her mission is to educate, encourage, equip, empower, and embody equity, and to help promote health and healing to all people one day at a time. Linda has studied and worked in childcare, higher ed, healthcare, dance, and fitness studios, and is gearing up to launch her own LLC, Soul to Soul Movement Plus. So, Linda, thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing your insight and your expertise as well. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kick it off with a question for both of you guys. Dr. K, why dance? Why dancers? I mean, your expertise is lended itself to working with so many different athletes, but what makes dancers unique? Why do you love working so much with the dance industry?
Well, I think for me, it started back when I started working with cheerleaders back in 2000, and cheerleaders were pretty much neglected by all the other sports and orthopedic people around. I saw people all the time nobody took them seriously. No one took their activities seriously. And then I got some experience with the Rockettes when they were in Detroit all the time in 2003. And that really triggered something within me, realizing that these are people that they expose themselves and make themselves so vulnerable to perform for others, physically, mentally, emotionally. And the intersection of all those aspects of functionality of the body is so interesting to me, how they need all those aspects to work together in order to dance. And the fact that a person puts all their passion and all their heart and soul in everything they do, out from everybody else, with hardly with form-fitting clothes on, all these different issues about how the epitome of athletic and artistic performance is manifested in dance, and I think that really attracts me to it.
Do you feel like dancers need a little bit more TLC when it comes to embracing dance medicine and science?
I think the way I would put it is I think there's a much more understanding now about dance in the first place. I mean, like, for instance, the most common thing, I'll see a 14-year-old dancer come in, a 15-year-old dancer, and I'll say to them, let me guess, you saw a couple of doctors, they said, no dance for 4 weeks, you came back, you still hurt, they told you, be off in there 4 weeks. So it's amazing how, like, if you have a football player who comes in, we're going to put some tape on your knee, we're going to put a brace out, we're going to have you do a rehab program right away, we may consider an injection right away, and the dancer is just take off because there's not a lot of understanding about it and what drives them to dance in the first place, but also the needs and understandings of it. So I think when everybody understands it better, we tend to see more improvement with the healthcare of dancers. I think it's the same thing in sports medicine 25 years ago, where football players were put out there in the field for 2 days in 90-degree heat, 90% humidity, and the wrestlers were cutting weight the day before, the night before a meet. All those things, we didn't understand what the science behind that back then. Now we do, and that's why sports medicine has changed. The hope is to get dance medicine to the same point.
Yeah, 100%. And we're a little bit behind. I think the 8-ball a little bit. We need to catch up, and I think that work is starting to happen, as you mentioned. And so we're going to talk about that more in this chat. But Linda, and I want you to weigh in as a dancer yourself. What are the challenges that come with juggling a chronic illness with such a rigorous training schedule that relies so heavily on using your entire body, and I mean mentally and physically? Linda, unmute on Zoom. Unmute yourself on Zoom so Facebook can hear you too. Here,
apologies.
You got it.
Yes. Hi, everyone. For me personally, speaking from first person, planning and preparing as best as I can. Hydration, proper sleep, nutrition, stretching, getting body work, seeking the help and collaboration of sports doctors, massage therapists, those types of things. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of money that goes into it. And then that R&R, rest and recovery.
Which we don't do enough. I think that the element of recovery, we're talking a lot about that. I feel like more the last couple of years. I feel like we're hearing that word recovery a lot more. I know on the Apolla side, we're talking about it all the time. And we're constantly facing that challenge that dancers don't, that's not the first priority, right? It's always, what am I going to wear in class? What am I going to wear for rehearsal? How am I going to get through those things? And then the not so much put on the recovery element. So I think that understanding and embracing the rest part of that, the recovery aspect and what that does for your entire body is so important. Again, thank you so much for being here. So we're going to get into the first segment. Melissa, and Dr. K, before we move on, I think we lost you on Instagram. Can you?
Yes, when I try to request you, you're not coming up. So if you can shoot a request my way, if at all possible, then that might be helpful. But for some reason, it dropped you off.
It dropped me off for some reason.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Can you request me? Because it won't let me request you for some reason. Oh, here it is.
You got it?
Let's see. There you are, and you are back. Wonderful.
Right.
There you go. All right. So my first question is for Dr. K. I think there are some people who may not understand what defines a chronic illness. What makes an illness chronic? And what are some of the most prevalent ones that we see? I'm going to split it up in ages because, of course, dance is for everyone. But I'll split it up into some of the most common ages that I work with. So what are the most prevalent chronic illnesses that we see between people in 21 and 40 years of age?
Well, so the chronic illness is pretty much defined as any condition or illness disorder that lasts for 1 year or more.
Okay.
So essentially, if you have pneumonia, we don't really call that chronic illness. But chronic bronchitis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, hypertension, those conditions tend to last longer. Doesn't mean you have a lifelong condition. Like some folks will have issues with cholesterol. And that's just a lifelong condition. If you don't treat it, it gets high. If you do treat it, it gets low. That Lyme disease, it can last for a very long time, but then if you get it treated, it goes away. So those are the different types of chronic illnesses, diseases, conditions. Some are considered disorders, like either Stanley syndrome is almost like a disorder as a part. You can classify it as a disease, or it becomes a semantic mess sometimes when you try and describe illness, disease, disorder, condition. what have you. But pretty much anything that lasts for a year or longer that person has to live with is considered a chronic illness.
Now, it's not, like you said, it's not consistent. Like if I struggle with lupus, right? So I was diagnosed with lupus when I was young, but I have flare-ups. I have periods of flare-ups. That's still a chronic illness, even if I'm not in the middle of a flare-up. Is that correct?
Precisely, right.
Okay.
So like chronic illness, like for instance, hypertension, you can take a medication, you can be having your pressure low enough to be considered not hypertensive at that time, but you still have the condition of hypertension. Same with diabetes. And the art of those disorders is keeping those under control for a long period of time so you don't accumulate damage. You think of hypertension, the increased blood pressure is like increased water pressure in the pipes. And so at the end organ stage of the pressure, the blood flow, that water, let's say, pushes on the cells too much, breaks them down. So if the pressure is low enough consistently, you don't get that kind of cellular damage in your kidneys, in your liver, your heart, what have you. When you have it unchecked, when you let it go and let it be higher than normal, that's when you start accumulating damage in your kidneys. And all of a sudden, when you're 50 years old, your kidneys aren't working as well, and so on and so on. So autoimmune diseases like lupus, as you mentioned, are what we call basically when the body's immune system fights against it.
Yes, sir.
So if you can control the response to that, then you're in a good place. You don't have a flare-up. You're feeling good. And then when whoever helps trigger another response or another immune attack, that's when the symptoms flare up again. So yeah, people live with that condition, but you're not in a state of disorder or disrepair or illness all the time.
Right.
And it makes it really challenging. And we're going to get into this later, but it makes it challenging when that person is responsible. There's a lot of things you can do with chronic illness to manage your symptoms, right? And manage those flare-ups and manage when you're active, but you can't always, you can do your best to mitigate them and try to protect yourself from that, but you have no control over when that happens. And when it does happen, it puts you into a completely different state, and what your body is able to handle and how you have to pull back. And people can't always see that. People can't always see that change happening. You feel it, but you can't see it.
Right.
That's a big problem with illnesses in general like this, because because people we don't know how people live with these things, number one, but number two, people have different expectations. So we as doctors, we're always trying to help set expectations for the patients and help empower them to get control over it. The worst situation for me I see is when patients don't feel they have control, dancers especially. If they have a condition where they don't have control of something, then they go into various coping mechanisms that can be detrimental to their performance ability. So avoidance is one thing they do. Right? They stop doing something and they get scared to even try anything. Or catastrophizing. So everything is horrible. Everything is the worst. And it becomes a big problem for them. So it's helping them understand that here are some things you can control, empower them to do it, and make sure they understand that it is up to them. It's up to you more than the doctors to help you control it, because at the end of the day, if you let things go and you don't manage your sleep, you don't manage your, at least I just mentioned that, you don't manage your, your rest and your nutrition and such, then you will have more disorder amongst the systems in your body.
Do you think that dancers are challenged more in this way because we have this like no pain, no gain mentality that we're used to just pushing through the pain as dancers and athletes anyway, that when it comes to our health, that we're like, oh, I'll deal with that later. know?
Well, here's a great example. So like when you train for a marathon, you build up your mileage when you're training. And then 2 weeks before you go into taper mode where you bring your load down before the big race. In football, day before a game, you go through walkthroughs, no hitting, no heavy exertion. And other sports all do the same thing. Dance and big shows and performances, especially as a certain college nearby us, out in the west side of Detroit, where they, it's like dress rehearsal, and then performance. And then before dress rehearsals, it's all this intense, work on things, and then changing things last minute and all these things. So there's no other activity I know of where you build up all this load to the performance. So then at the performance, the person is basically in a mode of, I just gotta get through this.
Absolutely.
You can't really, feel like you're in the moment. You can't really enjoy the performance and be there for have your physical peak at that time. You're just trying to survive the show. And I see it all the time because like one day in my clinic, they're like, oh my God, it's done. So that I think typifies the kind of problems that dance has, because no one wants to tell the choreographers this is wrong. And hopefully as we educate people more and more, they'll start realizing maybe we shouldn't change the choreography one day before the performance.
Right.
And then change it back when you don't think it works out.
I'm guilty of that as a director, as a teacher. I'm so guilty of it. I know if I could go back and tell myself, don't do that. After knowing what I know now, I would. But it's one of those things like you lose your perspective in the moment.
Yes.
But Melissa, I got us off on a tangent. So finish.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm coming back. I'm coming back. So but I do want to recognize. I love what you said. It is the only sport art form where you ramp up to get to the point.
Kelsey, we have a comment on Facebook. Kelsey Kiernan says, I feel so seen right now. LOL.
Exactly.
That's why we're here, Kelsey.
So Linda, you have a thriving career, as we mentioned in your bio, all these amazing things that you are doing. You have a thriving career as an educator, a health professional, a dancer. Do you find that there's a large community of dancers and athletes that live with chronic illness and disability? And do you think that the dance community is doing enough to make movement arts accessible to that community? It's a big question.
Yes. I do know of some from friends to just folks that I follow and have learned about over the years that are successful and that have various disabilities, that have various health conditions. I wrote some of them down. Let me see if I can find them real quick to share with anyone who's interested. Like Ill Abilities, Access, Dance for Parkinson's is here in Colorado, Refinery 29. There's a number of companies and dancers at the intersection of disability, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. But yeah, I think in like smaller studios and at the university level, we don't always see as many folks identifying or like feeling that the space is conducive of that on any given day at any given moment. So that's problematic. That's a concern. That's a red flag for me. And the second part of that question, no, I don't think that the arts, fitness, these industries have done enough. I think that there's always room for conscious continuing learning, growth, asking questions, acknowledging where you missed a mark.
Do you feel like it starts at the studio level? And this is you, either one of you can answer this, but do you feel like it starts at the studio level in terms of the responsibility for cultivating a culture that is more welcoming and inclusive of people with disability and chronic illnesses? Or do you think it really is up to the, is it a top-down approach where it's coming from the leading organizations and the industry leaders that are responsible for setting the tone and having that trickle down?
Well, I think personally, it's been kind of a cultural thing. It's just, you don't, especially if you have a dance program that's geared towards a community dance, for instance, where you're more worried about like just having people enjoying themselves, then you're gonna be obviously a lot more sensitive to that. But if you're talking about competitive dance, higher level dancing, it's just culturally that is basically you get with the program or you're out of here. And so, and that's just kind of like how it goes, because again, when I talk about sports medicine and everything from like 25 years ago, a lot of sports medicine we used back then was anecdotal. My coach taught me this, and my coach taught me this, and that's how it was for us. That's how we do it. And so we see the dance. My dance teacher danced with Baryshnikov's cousin, and so that's what they did, and they were just fine. And Russian, academies, do that, and like Irish, academies do similar things. And so I think now that we're starting to have more of I think the biggest thing we're trying to do, and especially with the organizations I work with, is trying to establish more of a dancer-centric approach to dance training. Not to say that the dancer has all the say in the world on all the choreography and all that type of stuff, or like, I don't like that step, not trying to say that, just by focusing on the dancers themselves from the dancer out and having more of these concerns taken into consideration. It doesn't mean you have to change the whole dance just to accommodate someone's asthma or something like that, or anything like that. It doesn't mean that at all. It simply means that taking those things into consideration, being aware of it. And when a person joins the studio, having a little sheet, have these kind of conditions there. So everybody, it's just in the back of their mind.
It's a great point.
Simple little things would make a huge difference with dancers.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. K, will you turn the volume down on your phone a little bit? Because we're getting some feedback, an echo on the Instagram. So on your phone, just click the volume down. No, that's a great point. And we talked about that with pronouns, and it makes sense that we would also include that for chronic illness and disability as well, is like normalizing that when we're onboarding a student onto our company or into our studio, we're just simply fill in this information, and it's normalizing asking for this information, right? Linda, do you feel like that would make a big difference for families and dancers dealing with chronic illness and or disabilities, that they would, to see that on a piece of paper? Do you feel like that would be a sign that, hey, we see you and we respect your privacy, but we want to know this about you so we can help? Is that a good way to approach it for studios?
I think that's a nice start, yes, to ask, just like if you would ask if like someone has a food allergy or like food like preference and tolerance. So to get as much information about, are you brand new to dance? Are you brand new to movement? Do you have a history with it? What genre, what style of dance has this student, this participant engaged in, participated in? And so just gauging that, gearing that, the most information you can have kind of in your that you can have, I think is really important. But I think how you ask and why are you asking is really important. Just be like, I'm not trying to get this to like out you, to embarrass you. I think the approach, talking about like person-centered, is really important. That approach, that ask, how are you doing it? Are you doing it verbally, auto words? Are you doing it, vocally? Are you doing it in writing? Is that the best mean of communication for that individual and their family?
Right. Do you think it's better to have, because obviously, the bigger your program, the harder it gets to have these personal conversations with everybody. Do you think it's a good place to start? And I'm asking this and I'm persisting with this because I think it's really important. As Melissa said, we go into next year, we talk about things small changes we can make to make every student feel seen, heard, and validated, right? That we ask them on a piece of paper. And if somebody responds with any sort of content or information that that is a flag, like, yes, I struggle with this and I these are my needs, then having a conversation with that person, if there's something indicative on the form, having another conversation with that person face to face would make them feel better about that. But, as a jumping off point, I don't know if it's realistic, and I'm just being honest, for a director to go to every single person and be like, do you struggle? You know what I mean? And I don't even know. You want to respect people's boundaries and privacy too. Like if they don't want to share something, or you don't want to put somebody on the spot. So do you think that's a good compromise in terms of start out with this, filling out this form, and if there's something on there, offering to have an in-person conversation, obviously confidential?
I think a follow-up question is really important, if they're open to that, because making assumptions like, I have fibromyalgia, I have this, like, what extent? Like, I think it was you, Brie, that said, like sometimes we're going to have flares. Yeah. Sometimes we're going to have flare-ups. We're going to have worse days, worse hours, worse moments. And so in that, just trying to gauge, that student, asking them, what like maybe they need and everything like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it's important too to recognize, like Dr. K said, there is no governing body in dance. Dance studio owners are doing this for a love of dance. They're not doctors, they're not psychologists or counselors, they're not physical therapists, and so to expect people to just know what to do with all these different chronic illnesses is not realistic, nor is it necessarily fair. I think we're going to talk about it, whose responsibility is that to inform, right? But I think it's you have to meet people where they are, but also when you know better, you do better. So if you're aware that somebody is struggling with an illness, at that point, it becomes your responsibility to figure out what that means for that student, and how you can support them in that. And that means doing a little research and education. Dr. K, I can imagine I have gone through this, where physical activity like dancing, yoga, sports, etc., can be painful with people with these chronic conditions. So is there any research that shows that increased movement can actually lessen or alleviate pain, or does it make it worse?
Well, there's great research now. So like back in 2007, we started the Exercise is Medicine initiative through the American College of Sports Medicine, along with the American Medical Association and the Surgeon General of the United States government at the time. This was something where we basically were helping to make doctors and healthcare professionals more aware of exercise as a treatment tool for various chronic diseases in general. So this is where I think an important point needs to be made about COVID-19, because what COVID-19, one of the biggest take-home points for me with this pandemic is that looking at the numbers, it's hiding under the headlines. So 96% of all deaths that occur from COVID-19 had the people who died had comorbid conditions. And the most common ones were chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, obesity. I think number 4 is actually hypertension. So if you go to the CDC and you talk about, and they talk about how you treat these conditions, every condition for treatment and for prevention starts off with exercise, diet, and nutrition.
Yeah.
Every one of them. And so you start thinking that in terms of like, well, we look at this pandemic, it turns out that really it's exposing just how poor our lifestyles are. And as a whole, as a culture and society. So that's why, like, for instance, dances and exercise is wonderful because it's aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, strength, flexibility, all the things we talk about in basic exercise programs for seniors, for anybody to stay active. Dance incorporates all that all the time instantaneously. And there's an emotional component for it as well. I don't think anybody really feels emotionally connected to a treadmill, a 2% grade at 4 miles an hour.
I do not feel emotionally connected to the treadmill.
I feel emotion, but it's not
I want to kick the treadmill.
I do feel emotion, but it's not the right one.
Yeah, no.
Exactly. So there's plenty of evidence out there to support it. The problem is helping people do exercise in a way that works for them. I mean, there's a big reason why Peloton works so well for people, because you can go downstairs. And they figured out a long time ago that you can go downstairs or wherever your machine is and do stuff, exercises, have people working with you, have it tracked, all right there in one little space without having to go to the gym, without having to go anywhere else. And you feel connected as well. I think that's a big part of this, is making exercise more accessible to people. That's been our mission since 2007. And we got a ways to go, as COVID clearly showed.
Yeah. Thank you. So
Linda, you said, I'm sorry, Linda had a comment that she put in Instagram there. You said sitting still actually is more bothersome for you. Oh, you're on
nine times out of 10 for myself, being stationary, being still, and like laying down. So like sciatica and like recovering from a knee injury from the last few months. Being still, like sometimes the back will stiffen and locken up, and it's just even been shown that, this is like not the most great of news, but like the more someone sits and everything like that, I mean, obviously there's a situation, like if you need to sit and lay down, please honor your body. That's beautiful. That's important. But like the more we sit and stay still, like that is just going to kind of accelerate, that can worsen pain, that can worsen a health condition, or like create a health condition that's not maybe even there. So yeah, movement as medicine, movement as therapy, is really vital to our survival, I believe.
Yeah.
There's one point I was going to make as far as research. Recently, we saw people who have knee arthritis and a meniscus tear. We used to always do knee scopes, arthroscopy, having surgery to fix that. Research now clearly shows that physical therapy and exercise is as effective for meniscus tears with arthritis than doing surgery.
Wow.
So like we're starting to see now, and to much to the chagrin of certain orthopedic surgeons, of course, that you can actually get better results, as good of or better results, with movement and strengthening and exercise.
Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you for that. If you're just joining, I'm Bree with Apolla, here with my co-host Melissa McDaniel. We're chatting today with Dr. Stephen Karaginas and Linda Gernhard We're talking today about how we can better support our students and dancers that struggle with disability and chronic illness, how we can support them in that. We're about to head into our second segment. Linda, you're very passionate about making sure movement spaces are accessible, comfortable, and affirming of disabled people. I think often reduced accessibility, to reducing accessibility or, to upfitting buildings and rooms that may or may not have ramps and appropriate clearance for wheelchairs, but it's much bigger than that when we're talking about movement arts. What are some of the things that people don't consider when truly creating a comfortable and accommodating environment and culture for disabled people and disabled dancers in particular?
I love this question. I'm so excited that you asked this. Sensory, thinking of sight, of smells, of sound. Is fluorescent lighting, is that going to be problematic to someone who has had a TBI, traumatic brain injury, that has epilepsy, that has migraines? That's just that having migraines, chronic migraines, is a disability. So thinking about the types of light, thinking about the level of sound for folks that maybe are hard of hearing, are deaf. Let's see what else. Smells. I have chemical sensitivity. I have little rundown here. I have fibromyalgia. I have sleep apnea. I have previous I'm neurodivergent, fine motor, some issues, learning disabilities, a few other things. And so certain smells, so like fragrances, like perfumes, lotions, even like muscle rubs and creams, which are great for helping to subdue some pain. But sometimes those can be bothersome to folks if they have an allergy and, if that smell is too strong, if that aroma is too strong. So maybe asking folks, please don't use that, or, use it at another time or something. Language, words. Again, whether if you are actually saying something or if it is posted, please consider your font, please consider your colors, please consider how you are marketing and promoting things. I don't know if there's captions on this or will be later. So knowing that not everyone can see or see well, knowing that not everyone can hear or hear well. Knowing that not everyone is a visual learner, knowing that not everyone is an auditorial learner. I'm kinesthetic, hence why I dance, why I do movement. And so like I've always appreciated when teachers say when to do something too. So they're like, undo forward, step, clap to the right. Like when they're saying it as well as doing it, as embodying it. So I really try and give variations now that I've returned to teaching. And so like having them watch, so demonstrating that as the moment of study, saying it in different ways. Like I remember when I was teaching tap, like a cramp roll, it's 4 parts. So I was like up, down, right, or right, left. So playing them each way, and then like being in front of a student, being next to them, holding their hand, like looking at a mirror, not looking at a mirror, all those different things. Those are some ways I would just think about.
I'm glad you mentioned
a lot of sensory stuff.
I'm glad you mentioned language, because that is a great segue into my next question. So, people can be hesitant to ask about how to offer accommodations to dancers or students who identify as disabled, because they don't want to appear insensitive or put something in a spotlight but in that way they could be doing the exact thing they're trying to avoid, right? So, the assumption that somebody is disabled or struggling can come off as offensive sometimes. The word disabled, there's some argument on if that's the right word to even use. We talked a couple weeks ago, Melissa, when we were talking about the 2S LGBTQIA plus movement, and how the word queer can be offensive in some circles, and so that's why it's not really an umbrella term. And there's all these things. What language do you use, and is it okay to directly ask somebody about the need for accommodations How do you approach all that? Because I think a lot of times in the society that we're in, the intent, if you have the greatest intention in the world to help somebody and make something more comfortable, and you fumble through it, sometimes you get attacked for that too. Right. So how do you approach all this? And either one of you can answer, but when we're talking about disabilities and chronic illness, all we want to know is how can we help? So how do you go about asking that question?
I think my perspective.
I don't know if, okay.
Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, Melissa. So, my first thought is like, why does someone need or want to know? Why do they wish to know?
Well, if we're in a studio,
one identifies, right? No, of course. Yeah. So yeah, knowledge is power, and knowing how someone identifies is a great way to be able to be supportive of them and their progression, their journey in dance and movement. I personally like the term and use the term disabled.
Okay.
Not like differently abled or.
Okay.
I know there's even like persons with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or insert said health condition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So for myself, I really like using the word disabled. It's just a part of my identity. It's not solely who I am.
Yeah.
It's a big part of who I am, for better or worse, so to speak. And yeah, a lot of folks that I have interacted with, that I do interact with, have shared that they are not necessarily a fan of differently abled. But yeah, I think it varies like person to person.
Okay.
Person.
Yeah. So it's like a personal preference is a word that seems kind of flippant, but it's a personal preference for people to do that. Do you think that leading with why you're asking for the information is a way to kind of level set? Like if I say I'm asking so that I can support you best, are there any accommodations that you need? Is leading with that better than saying, do you need accommodations? Just to kind of put people at ease.
I think when you're saying like, do you need X? Do you need Y? Do you need this? Maybe presumptuous, maybe making an assumption about what someone can or cannot do.
Right.
And knowing that because they could do it yesterday, we may not be able to do it today or tomorrow, or vice versa. Any kind of way of that. Yeah. I think the ask is so important, how you're going about that.
You had some thoughts on that, I think, before.
Well, one of the things we've discovered is in clinics and such with patients, that patients will tell paper what they won't tell people.
Mm-hmm.
So like
really?
A lot of times, yeah. So for instance, we started a sports performance training facility, which did all our dance performance work as well. Back in 2013. And we started within the first 6 months, we had so many kids coming in and started breaking down and crying and confessing to our staff about the pressure they're under and how much they hate their sport they're in and all these things. But we never knew this until they got with us personally. But when we started putting out forms for everybody as intake forms saying, do you have any concerns, issues, disabilities, emotional issues, and not that that's the verbiage we use, but putting those things on paper, the things they would fill out, the information they would give us is way more than if you just ask a person, so how's home life?
Right.
Fine. So any medical problems you should be worried about? No. But then you give them a sheet like, are there things that you need accommodations for? It's much more powerful for studio owners to do that. Again, if they don't really want to tell you, if they're really worried about confidentiality issues, then they won't put it on there if it's something really personal.
Right.
But most of the things that they're worried about that may hinder them from being able to participate in dance class, they will put on there because they want to let the person know so that they can they can help out with that. But how do you go about that? How do you get the information out of them? It's a simple thing, a form an intake form, and then having an email. For the studio owners, if people have concern or they get diagnosed with a disease, disorder, chronic condition, whatever it is, they can type it out in an email. Parents can do that. It's much easier sometimes than coming down. I got to sit down with you and talk. And
and it's a great way to start the conversation and get it out there. And then, you can have that meeting and go, how can I help you?
Easier, And then it becomes easier. Then both sides are fumbling around. Like, I don't want to say the wrong way.
Right.
I don't want to say this the wrong way. You have this. Okay. How can we help? I think the very first thing you said on part of this segment here is, how can I help? Yeah. That's a lot of times. At least I can tell, it gives us great examples of what she goes through with this, with the people she knows. But since I'm not in the dance studio, but how can I help sometimes is really powerful.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
Did you have a follow? I was going to go into my question.
No, do it. Let's go.
Awesome. Yeah. Dr. K, for athletes who struggle with chronic illness, how much of it is listening to your body and knowing when to rest? To your point about dancers earlier, we push up until the point. And, what are the most basic things that athletes with chronic illness need to do to consistently mitigate flare-ups and pain?
Right. So listening to your body is very important. And being proactive with your body. Sometimes people get scared and they just like, I'm just going to do this and run, and I'm sure it'll be okay. Right. And they figure it. Sometimes if you just put it out of sight, out of mind, they can mentally overcome it. When a lot of times we have lots of information to give to people that they can use to help their own conditions out. Medications. Sometimes taking medications are tricky based on your exercise. So if you take medication on an empty stomach and then exercise, you may throw up and be dizzy. So it takes some work sometimes. Advocating for yourself is very important too, because you can't expect your coaches to understand your situation without you letting them know. So if there is an issue, they have to let them know. The problem that does become, though, is no dancer or athlete wants to be in a situation to tell the coach or choreographer or teacher they can't go. Yeah, and that's where we come in. So like, for instance, an athlete, I never let the athlete tell the coach they can't go in. I want them to ever have that relationship where they say to the coach, I can't go. So, or a dancer, same thing. So I devise forms that we pass out through YPAD, for instance, that all the studios can have to give to the students so that they go see a doctor. It has all the specificity on there about like, okay, off dance, off bar, no grand jeté, no plie, all these different things there, all this detail so that it helps them get better specificity of what they can't do. So that's totally out. And then there's no mystery about what's going on. Here's why, this way it helps studio owners and dance teachers not have to wonder about a dancer's motive, and never put them in a situation where the dancer walks in, hi, I can't do bar today. Right. They want to please their teachers. They want to please their choreographers. So I think those kind of communication tools are very helpful with this. But honestly, it comes down to the athlete and dancer themselves to be able to say, okay, I got to take ownership of this. If I want to maximize my ability, sleep, rest, if I'm on medications for disease, taking them properly, nutrition, all those things.
Right.
Yeah. And it's tough because we talked about this before that, the younger you get, it's much harder for a dancer to advocate for themselves because they just don't have those communication skills, especially in a day and age where we're, constantly, and social media. And I find kids have a very hard time holding a conversation, especially with adults these days. And so, then it becomes the parents who aren't necessarily there all the time. And things get missed, and then on the flip side of that, we talked a little earlier about how you can't see a lot of these symptoms manifesting themselves in a dancer. So, all of a sudden for days at a time, this dancer is completely fine. And then one day it's, I can't dance. I need to sit out. I've had this happen multiple times with students that were, in my company where, they have endometriosis or they have, I had another child that had lupus. Endometriosis was a big one. I saw that in multiple kids in 1 year, where you don't see physically anything wrong with them, but they are feeling terrible. Right. And then you have these kids coming in going, I have to sit out. I have to go to doctor's appointments. I have to miss rehearsal. I have to miss class. The rules for that team is if you miss the rehearsal before a competition, you're not competing. If you're, if you miss so many practices, you're out. But yet these kids are then missing so much dance that they're so far behind because they physically cannot keep up, but it's not fair to punish them for that either.
Right.
And then you have the other teammates that are looking going, but I don't see anything wrong with so-and-so. They must be faking it. I need to be here. They need to be here. Like, this isn't fair. So how do you, I'm sure it's frustrating on all sides. And I think, what's your advice for dancers to keep that line of communication open between their teammates, their physician, their coaches, their parents, without putting a giant spotlight on themselves at a time when kids do not want to be like different. They want to blend in and be like everybody else. So how do you, what's your advice to dancers who are going through this? Dr. K.
Oh yeah. So I think, so the tricky part about this issue is what you mentioned with teammates.
Yeah.
And being dependable. So a lot of times if there is a problem, like endometriosis is a great example, because endometriosis can be horribly painful. And we do everything for a patient, and they, injections and medications and therapy, nothing helps it. So, but that's when you have to start having realistic expectations then, and everybody needs to have a good, frank, honest conversation. We appreciate your condition and the illness. Are you able to be, to meet these requirements? If not, then we have you in this level of dance or in this part of dance or this part. Not to say you're out, but it's just there's no way around it. It's the same thing with basketball teams. If a starter can't go because there's illness and they're dealing with the issues, they have to be separated from the team to take care of that issue. But that's what the biggest thing by far, though, in those situations is that the dancer needs help. That's why this is a big reason why I do what I do with dancers, because I found there's a gaping hole in helping people to advocate for them. So you need your parents. You're right. Kids can't really, describe what's going on with them much, very well, and articulate very well. So people need to be able to advocate for that person and take care of it. Really be proactive in managing it, because what I think is a lot of these prolonged treatment type of plans is because only a little bit here, a little bit there is being done. So I encourage anybody who has this to really get information from your doctor, do all you can to, if you really want to do something that requires you to be there consistently, do all you can to get yourself in to be able to meet those requirements.
Yeah.
And then if you can't meet those requirements, then everybody needs to agree that this may not be for that person. And unfortunately,
that is the toughest part, because eventually you have to have that conversation where you don't want to discriminate against anybody, and you want to give that child every opportunity to honor that commitment and be part of what they've worked so hard for. At the same time, you have to be realistic about what is physically and mentally possible, and the thing about a chronic illness that I found too with my students is that so much time is spent trying to get to the bottom of the problem and going from doctor to doctor to doctor. And oftentimes we're seeing specialists who, you have to get there. You have to eventually find the right person, but that is not a short time span. That is not an easy thing to do.
Nor is it a cheap situation.
Yeah, and it's not cheap. And so often, you spend a majority of the season waiting for the next available doctor's appointment with somebody that might be able to help. That person can't help. You've got to go to the next one. And it's extremely frustrating all around. So,
and the biggest problem I think with chronic, the most common example we'll see is with eating disorders. And I've seen in situations where people have some severe eating disorders and trying to stay in dance. I've had situations where a certain studio will have a certain dancer that has an eating disorder, but they're really good and they're very bendy and they're very, and the studio owner wants them there. And so they're like, okay, you don't have to dance as much. When you dance well. But every time they're in dance, it affects their illness. The body image aspect, the competitive part of it. Saying dance itself may be good, but the actual competitive nature of it brings out the worst aspects of the eating disorder.
Right.
So in a lot of the situations, the conversation has to be had where the dancer needs to separate away. Again, they may be winning awards and all that stuff, and that's all great. But if you're 13. There's awards to be won later on. The dance is not necessarily about awards. And so that person may need to separate away from the activity, from the competitive environment, I should say, to be able to take care of their illness, get control of it, and then come back to it, as opposed to lingering on, because that's a great example of a condition that is intricately woven into the actual activity itself.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like, I can't remember who said it, Melissa, but it was one of our chats that we had, and we need to prioritize the dancer, not the dance. And
Right.
Dancer centric.
Yeah, dancer centric. I love that term. So
Yeah,
yeah. And I think that that's something, bottom line from this whole conversation, we need to think about as we prepare to go back to dance, remembering that last year was a really hard year for so many dancers for so many reasons. And, our job is to create a safe, welcoming, inclusive space for everybody, no matter what that struggle is. And then, Linda's comment here on Zoom was, yes, and to know and remember that they do have a disability and or a chronic illness as well. So always keeping that in mind, that even if you can't physically see what's going on with them, that doesn't mean it's not happening, right? And we have to recognize and validate that. So Melissa, let's move on to homework, because I think we like to give actionable items and things for people to work on from one week to the next.
Yes, that's the key. Not just listening and not just talking, but actually working. So we're gonna go one at a time here. So and I'll start with Linda. What is one action item, one step forward that you would like our listeners, understanding that our listeners include parents and teachers and and students sometimes, that you want them to take between now and next week, so 7 days, to make progress in this area?
Just one. Okay.
Just one. No, it's like, one.
Inclusive language and or imagery. Yeah, because we've all heard the terms like representation, visibility matters, in the classroom, in the doctor's office, in the grocery store, like wherever we find ourselves, representation matters. Am I being seen? Is my student being represented? Is my child, supported? Is this a conducive container? Is this the best and most appropriate place and space for them now? And even to continuously reevaluate and visit that. So language, again, I probably are going to sound like a broken record, but I love interpersonal communication and public speaking. So verbally saying things, and then in writing, what is the text size? What is the colors? How is that being streamed? How is that being promoted? How is that being invited? And then especially for little ones and neurodivergent, et cetera, having those images, but also not being cliche and cheesy. Like you have or the poster child, you have one person in a wheelchair and that's it. So, or one person who's paraplegic or, with a broken, or something, just that one thing I don't think is truly embodying equity, is truly embodying accessibility and inclusion. Those are jargon words that we hear so much. And so the intent with the language and
you're saying all of these things working together. You can't just have a picture up and check the box that, hey, we're an inclusive space.
Right. You actually have to be inclusive.
People do,
but it's everything from camel case hashtags on social media to closed captions to the imagery that you're using in your marketing, and
Braille. Try to put something in Braille. Try to put something in different font sizes. Think about the words that you're using. It's even someone non-disability, but it's even someone English is that their first language. So taking it a step further.
Yeah, that's what I was going to piggyback off of that. You can use the imagery and you can say certain things, but if you haven't actually prepared your studio culture to accept and affirm people, then you're setting up a environment that's going to be negative for both people, for the studio owner and the other students as well as the students. So that's the advice and that's the homework, but you got to change on the inside before you create that picture on the outside as well. So hopefully this whole episode will help you with that. Dr. K, what's your homework for the next 7 days?
I think that from a studio owner, teacher perspective, and from a dancer perspective too, I think it can be applied both ways. But I would have them start working on a 30 seconds to a minute of every day of a check-in with yourself, either a check-in with yourself diary or some sort of documentation, or in the studio, a moment where everybody is encouraged to check in with themselves, reminding them, where people are forced to think about how they feel, how they're functioning, how they feel their dance is going, how they feel they're dancing, And then if they don't like that, then tell someone they trust about it. Parent, studio owner, teacher, something as simple as that. Just mindfulness of like how check in with yourself. How do you feel? I always tell dancers, your body and your mind is the instrument. So if you are playing a violin and it's off key, it sounds terrible, you tune it, you do things for it. So the check-in is a way of tuning your body, tuning yourself to always, to make sure you understand how you feel. And if you write it down, then you can see, oh my gosh, wow, last week was really rough. And now this week. So,
and it also may help you to articulate, in the weeks where everything runs together and we're bombarded with school and peer groups and things like that. You can really go back and identify, oh, wow, I really was going through. I see that pattern coming out weeks ago, and I didn't know that's what it was. You can explain that to health professionals and adults and supervisors and all the things. That isn't the first time we've heard that on the show. Ashley Mowry talked about journaling too, and how easy it would be for our educators and studio directors to incorporate that, not maybe every class, but maybe at the beginning of every night of dance, that team is sitting down and journaling for 5 to 10 minutes. And that would be a great thing to incorporate, and a very easy thing to incorporate as we head into the new season. So I love that idea.
Bree and I have some homework too, y'all. We also give homework between the next 7 days. So first, take the Steps 2020 Initiative course. It's a course that was developed by Apolla Performance to help dance educators tackle some of these issues. Racism, gender equity and inclusion, nutrition, sex abuse prevention, integrative dance, dance medicine and science, which includes psychology and mental health, all of those things in the Steps 2020 Initiative course, which is absolutely totally free. Yes, free 99. This course is available to you. You can go, I think Bree is going to put in the chats. I'm
sitting here smiling and and I need to put the link in. I'm just enjoying the conversation. Oh, that's awesome. I'm putting it in right now.
That link is about to go here in the chat on Facebook for you to be able to access that. Again, it is free, a number of modules that will help you answer some of these tough questions. Also, we have talked about YPAD throughout the show. There are a number of courses, wonderful courses that are offered by YPAD. That answer some of these questions, get you the solid foundation and knowledge base that you need. We have a discount code, so not free, but we do have a 25% off discount code for YPAD courses. It's Apolla25, and Bree is also going to drop that in the chat. We also want to know how to get in touch with both of our guests.
Yes.
Linda, tell them how they can reach you. What are your social media handles, and how can they reach out?
So I am predominantly using Instagram as a way of communication. I have 2 Instagrams. The one I'm currently logged in, LDWG Dancer, that's just my initials. And then I'll also put that in the chat unless someone else wants to. LG Hippie Soul and Spirit. And you can share my email too. That's fine.
Awesome. What about you, Dr. K?
So in my Instagram, Stephen Karaginas. It's you can find me easily on there. Facebook too, but Instagram is probably easier. I actually find it easier. And I don't mind. I mean, I've put my contact info out for dancers for like all these years, and not one time has anybody ever abused it. I know doctors like to stay behind these silos and with the corporate medicine world that we have now. But I'd rather have someone reach out and contact me about questions they have, some significant issues, and then as opposed to letting it go and not getting help, and all of a sudden it becomes something terrible, and now they don't have the help. And I would feel much better if someone actually did that. So feel free to friend me or send me a message on Stephen Karaginas. I'll have more information. I'm actually changing jobs here soon. So I'll be a new group here. So I'll have new information on all those sites, on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere.
Awesome. Do either one of you work virtually with studios or organizations? Do you guys do virtual consults to, I shouldn't say guys, do you both do virtual consults with organizations and studios? Yeah.
You do, Dr. K? How about you, Linda?
Yeah, we do. We do for sure. And insurance will cover it too if there's like an actual medical consult.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
What about you, Linda?
Some of the organizations I'm like an affiliate, I've trained under and with, do have online classes and online virtual resources. And that's something that my LLC that was a month out from yesterday that's launching.
Woo! Congratulations.
Thank you. Some stuff to do before then. I would definitely want to have online platforms.
Yeah, that's
Wonderful.
great. Thank you. And I want to take one more second and give another shout out to our friends at thebridgedanceproject.com. They are doing fantastic work to bridge the gap between the dance community and dance medicine and science and close that gap that's so desperately needed, as well as our friends at Doctors for Dancers. Their goal is to link you with a dance medicine specialist in your area. So no matter where you are in the country, and I think they're going worldwide, they're going to help you find a dance medicine specialist that is actually well-versed in treating dancers, which is so important. And it takes, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, it takes the time out of finding that person that understands your athlete and the specific needs of your athlete. So again, doctorsfordancers.com, they are doing great work, as well as our friends at YPAD. So check them out. And that's just a few that are coming to mind. I know there's more. This has been so insightful and given us so much more to think about as we plan the new season ahead and examine the way that we're going to approach all of our students. And remember, the goal is to create a safe space for everyone to feel happy, healthy, seen, and validated. The recording of this full episode and all of our episodes are available on Apolla's Facebook at Apolla Performance and IGTV for Turning Point Dance Creations _TPDC TPDC _on_IG. And if you register to join us on Zoom, you'll get a recording of each and every week's episode. We ask you to share so we can get the word out and start to affect real change in this industry that we love so much. Thank you again to Dr. Stephen Karaginas and Linda Gernhard Whitlow for joining us today. We're very grateful to you both for spending the time. And Dr. K, I hope you get power back really soon.
Right. Hope you're not having to live in your car for the rest of the night so you can have power.
I may be getting a parking ticket soon, so I may have to go. So
join Melissa and me. Melissa, thank you for this as well. Join Melissa and me next weekend, Friday, July 16th. We're chatting with Leah Bueno, who is a movement specialist, about what safe stretching looks like for dancers 18 and under. And what it really looks like. We hope you'll join us.
Great
until
topic.
then. Yes, it is, and much needed. Until then, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you guys so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Did we just exit out of that?